The smell of my daughter's burned teddy bear still clung to my robes when Vivian Crane walked into my courtroom. "That smell never really leaves you. It's like smoke remembers your name." She entered like she owned the place, wrists cuffed, chin lifted, eyes glittering with that same poisonous confidence she wore while terrorizing half the neighborhood. That same smile she'd flashed when she poisoned my late wife's roses. The same one she probably had when she watched my house my entire life go up in flames. Reporters filled every row, their cameras ready to catch a headline. "Show President faces federal arson charges," they whispered like she was the victim. But I knew better. I had the footage. I had the scars. She sat across from the prosecution table, orange jumpsuit crisp as if she'd ironed it. I'd seen hundreds of defendants try to fake calm before a sentence. None had ever smiled at me like that. I kept my face carved from stone. "My name is Judge Gabriel North. 15 years on the federal bench. I've sentenced mobsters, cartel accountants, corrupt CEOs, monsters hiding behind law. But none of them came close to Vivian Crane, the self-appointed queen of Cedar Hollow Ridge. She didn't just break laws. She built her own, and I suppose that's what happens when paper power meets real fire." When the gavel came down that morning, it wasn't justice I felt. It was gravity. Everything she'd built was about to collapse. Every fake fine, every fabricated violation, every lie, all because she made one fatal mistake. She burned the home of a man whose entire career was built on evidence. But before that day, before the courtroom, the cameras, the smell of char, there was a neighborhood that believed in good fences and quiet mornings. There was a daughter who laughed so hard she snorted milk. And there was a woman who thought bleach could erase love from soil. Let me take you back. 2 years earlier, Cedar Hollow Ridge still looked like something out of an old postcard, a place where time seemed to pause between sunrise and coffee. Narrow lanes lined with sugar maples, white mailboxes, and porch swings that creaked like polite applause when wind passed through. My wife Elena had planted roses in front of our little craftsman, right under the window that caught morning light. After she died, I kept them alive the only way I knew how, by never letting them die. Lila was 12 then, all knees and curiosity with Elena's same defiant grin. She loved the swing I built from old cedar beams, said it creaked like the house was talking back. Every morning, she'd leave her bike by the driveway and wave like she was flagging down the future. For a while, that was enough to make the world feel right again, until Vivian Crane showed up. The first time I saw her, she was parked across the street in a spotless white Escalade, idling like a luxury predator. Sunglasses bigger than her face, nails the color of warning lights. She stood in her driveway with a clipboard, measuring something invisible. That was her first tell. The obsession with measuring what wasn't hers. Within 72 hours, a letter appeared in every mailbox. Important notice? Community compliance review? No signature from any board, just a watermark logo of a pine cone and a slogan, "Harmony has rules." The letter claimed the Cedar Hollow Ridge Homeowners Association was being reactivated after years of negligent dormancy. It listed new bylaw codes, assessment fees, and immediate property requirements. Nobody remembered voting. Nobody remembered agreeing. Nobody even remembered having an HOA. The letter ended with, "Signed, Vivian Crane, Community Compliance Director." The next morning, she came from my mailbox. It was old cast iron. Black paint chipped by Michigan winters, hand-painted quail across the front. Elena's quail. She'd done it while pregnant. Said it looked alive enough to fly. 15 years later, it was one of the last things she'd ever touched. Vivian didn't care. "Non-compliant," she said, scribbling on her clipboard. "You'll need to replace this with a standardized aluminum model within 48 hours or face daily penalties." I looked at her. "There's no functioning HOA here. You're trespassing." She smiled like a teacher correcting a child. "Oh, there will be. You'll see." I should have called it what it was, delusion with a business card. But instead, I assumed she'd get bored. People like her always do. I was wrong. Within days, she began her parade through the neighborhood, taking photos of lawns, snapping measuring tape across driveways, yelling about property value violations. Her heels clicked like a metronome of menace. Neighbors started whispering. Some ignored her. Others paid her assessment fees just to make her go away. $50 here, $150 there. A few elderly couples even handed her checks, thinking she was city code enforcement. I drafted a polite, legal letter reminding her that the original HOA had dissolved 20 years prior, its corporate status void under state law. I cited property statutes, attached evidence, sent it via certified mail. I thought the law would be enough. 3 mornings later, I found her in my yard with a spray bottle. The sharp, acrid smell hit before the site did bleach. She was misting Elena's rose bushes. "Morning, Judge," she chirped. "Just helping with your little pest problem. We can't have dangerous insects in a family neighborhood." I froze. "That's herbicide." "Bees are dangerous," she said, smiling. "And these attract too many." I stepped forward. "Those are my wife's roses." "You're trespassing." "Leave now!" She sprayed again, slower, deliberate. "I filed a formal complaint with County Health," she said, eyes locked on mine. "We take safety seriously here." The roses wilted by evening. Their stems blackened like charred fingers reaching out of soil. Lila asked why they were dying. I couldn't answer. That night, I installed cameras. One on the gate, one under the eaves, one by the roses, all synced to a cloud backup. Years in court had taught me one truth: when evil feels safe, it performs. And performers always want an audience. 3 nights later, 2:43 a.m., my phone buzzed with motion alerts. Vivian again. All black clothes, gloves, flashlight, and that same spray bottle. But this time, she wasn't just destroying plants. She was placing forged violation letters under decorative stones. Each document carried fake signatures, including Mrs. Keene's, who could barely hold a pen from arthritis. I printed the footage, burned it to a drive, and walked into the county police station at dawn. I handed the evidence to Officer Caldwell, tall, mid-40s, practiced smirk. He slid the folder back across the desk. "Mrs. Crane's well known. PTA, church committee, runs the neighborhood drive. You sure you're not overreacting, Judge?" "Overreacting?" I said. "She's on camera committing trespass, forgery, vandalism," he shrugged. "Civil matter. Take it to your HOA." That's when I realized the infection had already spread. Over the next month, Vivian escalated. Fake towing violations, harassment letters, community safety patrols. She built her own dictatorship out of stationery. Every week, another neighbor caved. She'd target single parents, elderly folks, and anyone too kind to fight. When my sister Rebecca came to visit for Lila's birthday, Vivian had her car towed for unauthorized overnight parking. The tow company? Caldwell's cousins. When Rebecca confronted her, Vivian said, "Rules are rules, even for guests." That was the first time I saw Lila cry from anger instead of fear. I tried to keep her world intact: Saturday pancakes, bedtime stories, science projects. But fear creeps in like water, silent, cold, everywhere. I found myself checking locks twice, watching footage before bed, waiting for the next strike, and it came. One afternoon, while I was in court, Lila came home early from school. She found 2 men in our hallway, taking photos, fake inspectors with badges that said Property Audit Division. They told her not to question adult authority. She called me, whispering, "Dad, there are men in our house." My blood froze. I sped home, breaking every speed law I'd ever upheld. By the time I arrived, they were gone. Lila sat on the porch, shaking. They'd touched her things. Her stuffed rabbit, her books. That night, I filed for an emergency protective order against Vivian Crane. I attached 14 months of documentation. Judge Hernandez granted it within the hour, but Vivian wasn't done. She filed her own counter-order claiming I'd threatened her life and stalked her family. Now, 2 restraining orders existed, each one canceling the other. A perfect legal stalemate, but that was her mistake. Filing false reports against a federal judge made it a federal case, and that's when I stopped playing defense. I called my old friend. Mara Jennings, now a senior investigator at the State Attorney General's office. "Mara," I said, "I've got a suburban tyrant running an extortion ring under the name of an HOA." She laughed softly. "Send me everything you have. Let's see how deep the rabbit hole goes." That call would change everything. The morning after that call to Mara, the neighborhood looked deceptively normal. The same dew streaked across car hoods, the same smell of cut grass, the same sound of sprinklers whispering in rhythm. But to me, it all felt staged, like the set of a movie built over ruins. Because once you've seen what's hiding behind smiles and manicured lawns, you can't ever unsee it. Cedar Hollow Ridge had always been proud of its charm white fences, tidy porches, kids biking in circles till dinner. But in a matter of months, Vivian Crane had turned that charm into fear. She'd weaponized politeness. People stopped waving. Curtains stayed closed longer. Conversations turned into whispers. Even the air seemed to hesitate before moving past her house. Vivian didn't run an HOA. She ran a psychological experiment. By the time Mara's team started digging, the damage was everywhere. Outwardly, Vivian played her part perfectly: church volunteer, fundraiser chair, PTA vice president, always smiling for photos that made her look like a saint of suburbia. But the financial records told a different story. Mara's preliminary findings showed 3 separate bank accounts, all receiving neighborhood improvement payments. None of them registered to Cedar Hollow Ridge. They were linked to a personal LLC called Crane Property. Solutions, $89,000 in deposits over 9 months. Meanwhile, Mrs. Keene was skipping medication. To afford those mandatory landscaping fees, Mr. Alvarez was selling off his antique tools to pay safety penalties. It wasn't just greed, it was cruelty disguised as community. But while Mara and her team built the case in silence, my own home felt like a pressure cooker. Lila started sleeping with the lights on. Every creak, every engine passing outside made her flinch. She wouldn't admit it, but she was scared to step out onto the porch. One night, I found her sitting cross-legged on her floor, taping together a torn photograph of her mother Elena holding baby Lila near the rose garden. The photo had been torn in half during that fake inspection. She was whispering to herself, "I can fix it if I'm careful." Watching her rebuild that memory piece by piece was like watching my own heart learn to beat again in pain, but still working. That night I made myself a promise. Vivian Crane had taken our peace, but she wouldn't take our dignity. Over the next week, I transformed the house into a fortress of receipts. Every letter she sent, I scanned. Every inspection notice, I time-stamped. Every camera feed I backed up in triplicate local drive, cloud server, and encrypted flash hidden behind the breaker box. Years on the bench had taught me that truth without proof is just noise. Meanwhile, Vivian doubled down. She started hosting what she called community reinforcement meetings in her living room gatherings of 10 to 12 nervous homeowners. She'd stand in front of them, in her trademark purple blazer, surrounded by stacks of fake paperwork, and talk about protecting property values. Neighbors who questioned her were subtly shamed. "We all want a safe neighborhood, don't we?" she'd say, smiling wide enough to hide the knife behind her words. The next day, those same doubters would find violation letters in their mailboxes. When word spread that I was documenting everything, Vivian tried a new strategy: isolation. She whispered that I'd gone unstable since my wife died, told people I was dangerous, that I was using the courts to bully good neighbors. And the worst part? Some believed her. Fear makes cowards out of decent people. By October, Cedar Hollow Ridge had become 2 neighborhoods, those who paid her and those who prayed she'd forget them. Mara's updates came through encrypted calls at odd hours. "She's sloppy," she'd tell me. "She's filing fake expense reports using the HOA's old tax ID. That's federal fraud. We're almost there, Gabe. Just stay calm. Stay calm. That's easy advice when your life isn't being dismantled one violation at a time." The week before Thanksgiving, I got a call from the school. Lila had a panic attack in gym class when she saw a white SUV in the parking lot. It wasn't Vivian's, but trauma doesn't care about license plates. I took her home early. We spent the rest of the afternoon baking pumpkin muffins we didn't eat. That night, as we cleaned the counter, she asked quietly, "Dad, do bad people ever stop?" I told her the truth. They stop when good people stop being scared. She nodded but didn't smile. Kids can smell lies. 2 days later, the next phase began. It was a Sunday morning when my neighbor, Mr. Alvarez, knocked on my door holding a crumpled piece of paper. His hands were shaking. She says I have to repaint my shed or she'll sue me. I don't even have an HOA account, Judge. What can I do? I read the letter, official seals, legal jargon, threats of liens. Vivian's signature at the bottom. It even had a case number. But I knew that format. It wasn't legal. It was theater. She can't enforce this, I said. She's bluffing. You own your property outright. He looked down, ashamed. I already paid her half. She said the sheriff would come. That's when it hit me she wasn't just faking power. She was faking the system itself, using legal words like weapons, counting on people's ignorance to keep them obedient. That night, I called Mara again. We need to move faster. She's extorting the elderly. Gabe, she said. We're building a federal case. If we rush it, she walks. You know how this works. Let her keep digging her hole. But Vivian didn't just dig, she started tunneling straight toward hell. One rainy Thursday, I returned home to find our front door propped open. Inside, the kitchen looked like it had been raided, drawers pulled out, papers scattered, a chair overturned. But it wasn't theft. Nothing valuable was missing. On the counter lay a manila envelope labeled Evidence of Judicial Misconduct. Inside, forged bank statements showing fake deposits into my account, printed emails suggesting bribes, and a letter on courthouse letterhead threatening Vivian Crane by name. It was good forgery. Not perfect, but dangerous enough to fool an amateur. The letter used phrases no real judge would write. I'll bury you legally and socially, language meant to sound powerful but dripping with drama. I checked the date. The letter was supposedly written the same day I'd been at a judicial conference in Washington, D.C., complete with recorded C-SPAN testimony. That's when I realized she was planting evidence for a smear campaign. I called Mara immediately. She's framing me. You need to move tonight. But before she could even respond, I got another call, this time from a news producer I'd never met. Judge North, she said breathlessly. We'd like a statement about the allegations of misconduct regarding your association with the Cedar Hollow HOA scandal. My blood ran cold. The story had already leaked. Someone had sent Channel 7 the forged documents, claiming an anonymous source. The headline was already running online. Federal judge under investigation for neighborhood corruption. In one move, Vivian had flipped the entire narrative from criminal to victim. The phone rang again, the chief district judge's office. Gabriel, are you seeing this? We'll need to place you on administrative review until this clears. My career, 15 years of service, was hanging by a forged letter. That night, I sat in the driveway staring at the charred remains of Elena's roses through the rain. Inside, Lila was asleep on the couch, her rabbit tucked under her arm. I whispered to myself, you picked the wrong man to burn. At 12:37 a.m., Mara texted, we've got something. The forensic accountant, Ravi, had traced Vivian's HOA funds into a chain of transfers, small payments funneling into an offshore account under a false identity, V. Crane, trustee. The total, $341,000. Enough to qualify for federal wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. The trap was finally closing, but Vivian was desperate. And desperation is the final phase before destruction. 3 nights later, Lila woke me with a whisper. Dad, someone's outside. I checked the monitor. A figure in a hood walked past the fence, flashlight cutting through the fog. Another followed carrying a duffel bag. I zoomed in. Derek Crane, her cousin. He moved like a man who'd done this before, confident, quick, careful. He disappeared behind the house. I called 911. The dispatcher hesitated when I mentioned names. Sir, is this about the HOA thing again? By the time a single cruiser arrived, the figures were gone. But on the side gate, they'd spray-painted 3 words in white paint. Obey or burn. I wiped it off before Lila saw. The next morning, I called Mara again. My voice cracked from exhaustion. She's escalating toward violence. We can't wait anymore. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, you're right. I'll coordinate with the feds. Get Lila somewhere safe. I sent my daughter to stay with my sister for the weekend, telling her it was a mini vacation. She didn't believe me, but she hugged me tighter than usual. For the next 48 hours, I barely slept. Every creak, every hum of the fridge sounded like danger. I kept the cameras rolling, the evidence folder ready, waiting for a move I knew was coming, and when it came, it was worse than I imagined, because Vivian Crane didn't just want to ruin me. She wanted to erase me house, memory, and all. By December, Cedar Hollow Ridge didn't feel like a neighborhood anymore. It felt like occupied territory. The lights that once twinkled for Christmas now flickered under stress timers mismatched, wreaths hanging crooked, laughter replaced by whispers behind curtains. The same people who'd once passed casserole dishes and lawn tools now avoided eye contact at the mailboxes, terrified of ending up on Vivian Crane's next violation list. And every violation had one thing in common, her signature. Curved, perfect cursive. Like she was proud of the pain she printed, I'd spent my life dissecting criminal minds in courtrooms, watching power twist ordinary people into predators. But this was different. Vivian wasn't stealing out of greed. She was feeding an addiction, the high of control. Every rule she invented, every terrified neighbor she broke, it made her feel untouchable. What she didn't know was that her empire was already collapsing. One email at a time. Mara's team had gone dark, operating like a quiet storm. No one in Cedar Hollow suspected that federal agents were reading Vivian's private messages, tracking her bank activity, and mapping her entire network of corruption. The beauty of a federal sting is patience. You let arrogance do half your work for you. And Vivian was nothing if not arrogant. 3 days after Christmas, she held her biggest power display yet, the annual Winter Compliance Gala. She printed invitations, gold embossed, and slipped them into mailboxes like wedding announcements. Entry was mandatory for all residents. The venue? Her own living room. The purpose? To discuss the future of Cedar Hollow Ridge and the safety of our property values. I didn't go, but Mara sent in someone who did, her undercover operative, using the alias Eleanor Briggs, posed as a recently divorced homeowner interested in volunteering on Vivian's board. Vivian welcomed her. Instantly, predators always love new followers. Through Eleanor's concealed recording device, we learned everything we needed. Vivian bragged about her. Compliance income, claimed she was saving the neighborhood from chaos, and laughed about people too dumb to know what bylaws mean. She even told attendees she was working with law enforcement allies. That phrase caught Mara's attention. She was referring to Sergeant Caldwell, the same officer who dismissed my reports. At one point, Vivian raised her wine glass and said something that made my stomach turn. If the judge keeps pushing, I'll make sure he never rebuilds that house of his. Some lessons have to be permanent. The guests laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. But Mara and I both knew Vivian wasn't joking. The next morning, I drove to the courthouse to check on my administrative review. My clerk, Denise, met me at the door, eyes tired but loyal. They're still investigating the forged letters, she said. But the chief knows it's bogus. Just stay patient, patience. That word had lost its meaning months ago. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You should have moved when you had the chance. Attached was a photo of my burned roses. The image wasn't old. It was taken that morning. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. Someone had been in my yard again. I called Mara, my voice shaking with fury. She's escalating. We need eyes on her house. We already have them, Mara said calmly. We've got a live tap on her phone and 2 of her associates. You'll get the update tonight. That night, she called me back. We've got something big. Vivian had wired $15,000 to an unregistered business account belonging to her cousin, Derek Crane, the same man I'd caught on camera lurking near my gate. The payment memo read, Project Resolution. Mara's voice hardened. That's our smoking gun. We just need to know what Project Resolution means. But the answer came faster than either of us expected. On the first Friday of January, Lila was at my sister's for the weekend. The house was quiet for the first time in months, too quiet. I poured a cup of black coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the manila envelope still labeled Judicial Misconduct. It was a reminder of how close Vivian had come to ruining me without ever stepping into court. Outside, the night was calm, moonlight bouncing off frozen driveways. Then, at exactly 10:54 p.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. Camera 3, backyard movement detected. I opened the feed, 2 figures. Dark clothes. Hoods up! They weren't kids! They moved with purpose, one of them broader shoulders. Slight limp was Derek. The other smaller frame, deliberate steps. The flash of blonde hair under the hood Vivian. I froze. They crouched near the basement window. Derek pulled something from his duffel bag, a canister. Vivian lit something small and tossed it into the grass. My throat went dry. That's when I realized what Project Resolution meant. I hit record, dialed Mara, and whispered, "They're here." She answered instantly. "Gabe, get out, now!" But I didn't, not yet. I needed proof, the kind that would bury her for life. I switched all camera feeds to live cloud upload and crept to the side window. Derek knelt by the gas line. Vivian's voice carried across the yard, faint, calm, almost tender. "Start in the basement," she said. "He keeps all his case files there. I want them gone." My chest tightened. Elena's journals were down there. The letters she'd written to Lila before the cancer took her. The thought of losing those nearly broke me, but then I remembered my daughter's face, the fear. She'd worn for months, and I realized that hesitation was exactly what Vivian wanted. I grabbed my phone and whispered into the mic, "Basement gas line, accelerant. Live footage." Mara's voice cracked through static. "Hold tight. Agents are en route." But Vivian must have sensed something. She turned suddenly, scanning the dark yard. Her eyes caught the faint red glow of my camera. She froze. Then she smiled, that same shark smile that had haunted me since the day she poisoned the roses. And she raised her lighter. The screen exploded. In white light, the blast threw me backward, my head hitting the kitchen wall. The air turned into heat. Every sound became one roar, crack, shatter. I don't remember how I got out. Maybe instinct, maybe luck. I remember stumbling into the street, choking on smoke, the night sky flickering orange. Neighbors ran out screaming. I fell to my knees in the cold mud. When I looked back, my home, the one Elena and I built, nail by nail, was a column of fire. I woke up in a hospital bed 12 hours later, lungs raw, hands bandaged. Mara sat beside me, hair tied back, expression grim but steady. "They got her," she said softly. "We have everything video, wire transfers, her voice on the line." She turned the tablet toward me. There it was. The footage from my own security feed backed up automatically to the cloud. Vivian Crane ordering her cousin to pour gasoline into my basement window, saying, "He's at court. The kid's gone. Just burn it clean." Even through the oxygen haze, I smiled. She recorded her own conviction. Mara nodded. "ATF and FBI are both on it. It's not just arson, it's federal terrorism against a sitting judge. She's never seeing daylight again." But the relief didn't come. Because I remembered what Lila would come home to: nothing. No photos, no drawings, no walls echoing her laughter. "She burned everything," I whispered. Mara's voice softened. "No, Gabe, she burned evidence against herself. You'll rebuild. And when we're done, she'll rebuild nothing but laundry piles in a federal jumpsuit." The next few days blurred into a storm of sirens, insurance adjusters and investigators combing the ruins. Fire Marshal Henderson confirmed accelerant residue, a blend of gasoline and solvent. "Professional job," he said, "but sloppy enough to leave fingerprints." They found Derek's driver's license half buried in ash. Found Vivian's lighter near the fence. Found 2 sets of boot prints that matched the pair Mara's team had already documented, leaving her driveway at 10:30 p.m. The evidence was so airtight it squeaked. By Monday morning, federal warrants were signed. At 11:23 a.m., a convoy of black SUVs rolled into Cedar Hollow Ridge. Agents in windbreakers spread like wildfire. Within minutes, they surrounded Vivian's house. The same pristine property she'd boasted about during every fake HOA meeting. Neighbors peeked through blinds as the woman who'd ruled them with fear was led out in handcuffs. mascara streaking down her cheeks. I watched from Mara's car across the street, oxygen tube in my nose, bandaged hand gripping the door handle. For the first time in 18 months, I breathed without fear. Vivian glanced around searching for allies, but nobody stepped forward. Not Mrs. Keene, not Mr. Alvarez, not even Caldwell, whose cruiser idled 3 houses down, pretending not to watch. When her gaze met mine, the smirk vanished. Maybe it was the oxygen tube. Maybe it was the soot still streaked across my face. But for once, she saw me not as a target, but as a survivor. The next week was a blur of statements, depositions, and endless paperwork. Federal agents collected every document, every recording, every neighbor willing to talk. Caldwell's name surfaced again and again in Vivian's emails. He'd been her shield, dismissing reports in exchange for cash donations from her association fund. Mara's team turned over the case to the U.S. Attorney's Office. The charge sheet was so long it needed a stapler to stay bound. Counts: federal arson, conspiracy to obstruct justice, wire and mail fraud, tax evasion, civil rights intimidation, extortion, public corruption for Caldwell. When the indictments dropped, the story went national. HOA President burns judge's home, faces federal terrorism charges. Reporters swarmed Cedar Hollow Ridge, desperate for interviews. But most neighbors refused to speak, still shaken by how easily they'd been manipulated. I stayed silent, too. Words can wait, justice can't. One evening, Mara stopped by my temporary apartment downtown. The smell of disinfectant lingered in the air, faint but constant. She brought takeout and an update. "She's pleading not guilty," Mara said, setting the files down. "Claims she was framed by a vindictive neighbor with political connections." I laughed, the first real laugh I'd had in months. "Let her. Every word she says will hang her higher." Mara smiled, eyes glinting. "Trial's set for early summer. And she's representing the best kind of defendant, arrogant, broke, and dumb enough to testify." Outside, sirens wailed faintly the city's lullaby. I turned to the window, watching the lights flicker over the skyline. "You ever wonder," I said quietly, "why people like her think they'll get away with it?" Mara shrugged. "Because for a while they do." She was right. For 18 months, Vivian Crane had ruled a kingdom of fear. She'd broken good people, stolen their savings, poisoned their gardens, and convinced them to thank her for it. But now, she was about to face a courtroom built on something stronger than fear, evidence, and I was going to make sure she never forgot it. 3 weeks later, while preparing to testify, I received an anonymous letter at my office. Inside was a single line written in perfect cursive: "I burned your house, but I didn't break you. That's worse. No return address. No fingerprints. Just that." I folded the letter carefully and handed it to Mara. She looked at it, shook her head. "She thinks she's still in control. That's the thing about narcissists, Gabe. They don't believe in endings." I smiled faintly. "Then let's write one for her." The trial was scheduled for May. By spring, the neighborhood had started to heal. Mrs. Keene's grandson built new rose trellises in my yard. Mr. Alvarez organized a community reset meeting where they voted to dissolve the fake HOA and file incorporation paperwork for a legitimate one, transparent, legal, and fair. They even proposed a fund, the Cedar Hollow Justice Fund, to help other neighborhoods fight back against rogue associations. Lila came home from my sister's and ran straight to the half-rebuilt foundation of our house. "Can I paint my room the same color?" she asked. I nodded. "Exactly the same. Just stronger walls." That night, I watched her sleep under a temporary roof and realized something I'd almost forgotten. Survival isn't just living through it. It's daring to rebuild where someone wanted you buried. The day before the trial, Mara called me again. "You should get some rest." "I'll rest when she's behind bars," I said, "and that's where I'll leave you for now on the eve of the reckoning." The neighborhood quiet again, but not asleep. The courtroom prepped. The evidence airtight, because by the time the gavel fell, Vivian Crane would learn the one truth every tyrant forgets. You can fake authority. You can fake paperwork. Even fake loyalty, but you can't fake justice. The courthouse smelled like fresh varnish and burnt coffee. Reporters crowded the marble steps, microphones pointed like bayonets. Every camera light that flickered felt like a flashback: heat, smoke, sirens. The night my world went orange. They called it United States versus Vivian Crane et al. But everyone in Cedar Hollow knew what it really was. The day the HOA Karen finally faced gravity. Inside, the air conditioning hummed too cold. I took a seat 2 rows back from the prosecution table, close enough to hear every whisper, far enough to remember I wasn't the judge today. Judge Patricia Hernandez presided. Sharp eyes, silver hair, the patience of someone who'd heard every lie twice already. She glanced toward me once, a small nod that said, "You made it through the fire." Vivian entered wearing the same arrogance she'd worn since the day she arrived on our street. Only now it came in prison orange. Shackles at her ankles, wrists cuffed, hair pulled back tight enough to hide the shake in her hands. Derek Crane followed behind, thinner, pale, eyes darting anywhere but toward me. The gallery was full. Neighbors, reporters, federal agents, even Sergeant Caldwell, sweating through a cheap suit, subpoenaed as a hostile witness. Mrs. Keene sat in the front row, pearls trembling against her throat. Mr. Alvarez held a folded photo of his late wife. He wanted her to see this. When the clerk read the charges: arson, wire fraud, conspiracy, tax evasion, intimidation, public corruption, the words echoed through the room like nails being hammered into wood. The prosecution opened with a sentence that drew blood. Vivian Crane built an empire of fear and set fire to it the moment justice knocked on her door. Every piece of evidence stacked like bricks. My surveillance footage, Vivian ordering Derek to start in the basement. Wire transfers labeled Project Resolution. Audio from the Winter Gala where she joked about making me learn a permanent lesson. Caldwell's bank records showing deposits from her fake HOA account. The jury's eyes never left her. When they played the security video, the courtroom fell into the kind of silence you can hear. Vivian's voice, calm, almost bored, filled the speakers. "He's at court, the kid's gone. Burn it clean." The flames reflected off the monitor, dancing across her own face. For the first time, she looked small. Her defense attorney tried to spin a miracle, claimed stress, claimed mental break, claimed I had orchestrated a vendetta to salvage my reputation. But cross-examination is where truth breathes. Assistant U.S. Attorney Amanda Walsh was surgical. "Mrs. Crane, did you collect over $300,000 in neighborhood assessments?" Vivian straightened. "They were voluntary community contributions." Walsh held up a copy of Vivian's own flyer. "Mandatory payment due in 48 hours or lion filed." "Voluntary?" Walsh asked. Vivian's throat clicked. Strongly encouraged. The jury wrote something down. Then came Derek. Plea deal, 8 years, full cooperation. He avoided my eyes while recounting every instruction, every payment, every lie. "She said burning the judge's house would reset everything," he muttered. "Said he'd move away. People would forget." "Did she mention the child?" Walsh asked. He swallowed. "She said the kid would be at school. She didn't care if timing was off." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Lila's photo, her school portrait, smiling, braces shining, flashed on the screen. Vivian flinched for the first time. During recess, reporters swarmed the hallway. Someone asked if I wanted revenge. I said one line: "Justice is colder, but it lasts longer." It trended by evening. Back inside, Caldwell took the stand. His lawyer had tried to quash the subpoena. Judge Hernandez denied it without a word. Walsh's tone was ice. "Sergeant Caldwell, did you receive electronic payments from the account registered as Cedar Hollow Association, LLC? He shifted. "Consulting fees." "Consulting on what?" "Community relations." Walsh projected the emails. "Thanks for keeping complaints off the books. More coming after the tow." Caldwell's face drained of color. When Hernandez ordered a brief recess, you could feel the jury already writing guilty in their minds. Day 3 was the explosion. The defense called Vivian herself. She walked to the stand as if it were a podium at one of her fake HOA meetings. Chin high, voice honeyed. I was simply enforcing standards. People let their homes decay. Someone had to care. Walsh let her talk, rope in hand. Mrs. Crane, did those standards include arson? Of course not. Then why did you instruct your cousin to start in the basement where he keeps his files? Vivian hesitated, eyes darting. Metaphor. For gasoline? Laughter cracked from somewhere in the gallery before Hernandez's gavel restored order. Vivian's mask fractured. He ruined everything, acting like his badge made him better than us. Walsh leaned in. Better or untouchable? Vivian's voice rose to a shriek. He thought he could ignore the rules. I showed him no one is above them. Silence. You could almost hear the ink drying on her sentence. Judge Hernandez's stare cut through her rant. Mrs. Crane, this is a court of law, not your living room. By afternoon, the prosecution rested. The defense had nothing left but paperwork and prayers. The jury deliberated for exactly 92 minutes, guilty on all counts. When the clerk read the verdict, Mrs. Keene covered her mouth and sobbed. Mr. Alvarez whispered, Finally. Derek closed his eyes. Caldwell's lawyer requested leniency. Hernandez replied, For corruption, leniency is surrender, and denied it. Then came sentencing. Vivian stood trembling, the orange fabric clinging like regret. Your Honor, she began, I was only protecting my community. Judge Hernandez's voice was steel. You terrorized it. You burned a child's home. You corrupted the badge meant to protect them. Protection and control are not the same. She paused, letting the words sink in. 15 years, no parole. Full restitution. Mr. Crane, 8 years. Sergeant Caldwell, 2 years and forfeiture of pension. The gavel fell. It didn't echo, it landed like closure. Vivian looked toward the gallery, searching for the sympathy she'd once harvested. She found none. Only faces she'd frightened, now staring back without fear. I stood, Lila's small hand in mine. For months I dreamed of this moment, but instead of triumph, I felt a strange quiet, like standing at the edge of a storm that finally spent itself. Outside, the sun was blinding, too bright after months of smoke and courtroom fluorescence. Reporters shouted questions. I ignored them. Mrs. Keene touched my arm. You can plant again now, she whispered. The weeks after the trial felt lighter, like the air itself exhaled. Federal restitution checks began arriving for victims. Mara's office announced a new initiative, the Cedar Hollow Precedent, requiring audits of dormant HOAs statewide. Lila and I moved into a rented bungalow near the rebuilding site. Every evening we'd walk past the foundation, now framed with new beams, and she'd ask, Do you think Mom would like it? She'd love it, I said. Especially the fireproof walls. She laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in a year. On weekends, neighbors volunteered, hammering, painting, planting. Even those who'd once paid Vivian out of fear showed up, determined to build something honest. The smell of fresh lumber replaced the ghost of smoke. One afternoon, Mara visited the site, hard hat tucked under her arm. You did it, Gabe, she said. We did, I corrected. And you're naming the new law? She grinned. Crane Act Criminal Restitution Against Neighborhood Extortion. Ironic, huh? We both laughed. Sometimes justice has a sense of humor. 6 months later, the new house stood finished modern lines, steel beams, wide windows catching every ounce of daylight. But in the backyard, I rebuilt Elena's rose garden exactly as it had been. Soil tested, roots deep, colors defiant. On the morning we moved in, Lila placed a small metal sign by the first bush. It read, Paperwork beats lies. She'd painted it herself. Neighbors gathered for the ribbon cutting, a quiet crowd under bright skies. Mrs. Keene brought cookies. Mr. Alvarez brought a flag. Mara gave a short speech about accountability, about how one community's nightmare became another's handbook for resistance. When it was my turn, I looked at the crowd, faces once divided now united, and said, Fire destroys fast, but truth rebuilds slow. That's the difference between fear and law. Applause rolled through the yard, soft and real. Later that evening, as sunset spilled gold across the porch, Lila sat beside me, notebook in her lap. "Can I tell our story at school?" she asked. "Tell it," I said. "But make sure they know it's not about fire. It's about people." She wrote the title in big letters, "When the Neighborhood Fought Back." Weeks turned into months. Vivian's appeal failed. She was transferred to the Federal Correctional Institute in Danbury. Rumor said she'd taken a job in the prison laundry, still bossing people around until someone reminded her there's only one rule inside those walls. Real authority wears a badge you earn. Caldwell served his term quietly. Derek kept sweeping floors in Oregon, paying restitution every month. And Cedar Hollow Ridge? It became the blueprint for reform. Law schools studied our case. News anchors called it suburban justice. State legislators passed what they nicknamed Lila's Law, protecting minors from harassment under fake housing enforcement. It's strange how silence can be louder than sirens. When the fire trucks left that night so many months ago, I thought silence meant ending. Now, standing in my rebuilt kitchen, I know it meant beginning. The first thing I noticed wasn't the walls or the new paint. It was the smell of coffee. Real coffee, not smoke, not antiseptic, not the sterile air of hotels and hearings. Just coffee, blooming into a house that was ours again. Lila sat at the counter, tying her shoelaces, a teenager now with her mother's same fierce eyes. On the table beside her was a neatly folded newspaper. HOA president denied parole. The headline didn't even make me angry. It just felt finished. I'd stopped marking dates when Vivian Crane went to prison. But the world hadn't. 16 months after the verdict, Cedar Hollow Ridge became a symbol. Law journals studied it. News outlets replayed the footage of that trial every time another rogue HOA story broke across America. They called it the North Precedent. I called it closure. People still sent letters, some angry, some grateful. "You gave us courage. You gave us a plan." One woman wrote, "You gave us back our Sundays." Mara told me once that real justice doesn't just punish. It changes the landscape so the same wound can't open twice. And she was right. The state passed the Cedar Hollow Housing Integrity Act, modeled after our case. Mandatory transparency audits for all associations. Verification of incorporation and felony penalties for forged enforcement. They even slipped in a clause I didn't ask for. Section 12.3 protection against retaliatory harassment of federal employees. But the thing that made me proudest wasn't the law. It was the garden. Elena's roses were back, fuller than ever. Each neighbor had brought something of their own to add: Mrs. Keene's white lilies, Mr. Alvarez's marigolds, Mara's ivy. It looked like forgiveness woven from soil. Every morning, Lila waters them while the sun climbs over the ridge. She hums same melody Elena used to hum while baking. It's her way of keeping both of us alive. I still wear the old judge's robe, the one that smelled like smoke the day Vivian walked into my courtroom. I refused to replace it. The dry cleaner couldn't fully erase the faint trace of ash, and I didn't want him to. It reminds me what we walked through. Sometimes, late at night, when the neighborhood is quiet and the wind carries the smell of rain, I open my window and listen. Not for danger, for proof. Proof that peace doesn't always die. It just hides until you earn it back. The Cedar Hollow Justice Fund grew faster than anyone predicted. What started as a neighborhood restitution pool turned into a national nonprofit. Within a year, we'd helped over 100 families across the country fight fraudulent HOA boards. I remember one woman from Arizona, a single, mother of 2, who'd been fined $10,000 for painting her porch non-approved, beige. We connected her with pro bono counsel, used our precedent, and 2 months later, her case was dismissed. She sent us a photo of her porch afterward, beige as ever, kids smiling on the steps. Her caption read, "Thank you for proving beige is beautiful. Stories like hers reminded me why surviving wasn't enough. We had to build something that helped others survive, too." Mara became a national figure after our case. She testified before Congress about HOA abuse. I watched her speech on TV, smiling as she said, "The system didn't just burn one man's house, it burned its own trust. Our job is to rebuild both," she called later that night. "You'd have hated being the poster boy," she teased. Maybe, I said. But the poster worked, she laughed. We're launching a legal fellowship in your name. The North Fellowship. For students who want to prosecute housing corruption. You okay with that? I'm honored, I said quietly. Elena would have been too. By the second summer, the new Cedar Hollow looked nothing like the old one. Gone were the fake notices and clipboard tyranny. The streets were brighter, cleaner, alive. Kids rode bikes again without parents glancing nervously at the corner. People waved at each other like neighbors again instead of suspects. Our community board met monthly, transparent, and public. The minutes were pinned to the bulletin board at the park for anyone to read. The treasurer's reports were posted online. No secrets, no emergency powers, no fake fines, just people fixing what they owned and respecting what they didn't. Every meeting began with the same words. Printed at the top of the agenda, community means accountability. We even held open movie nights on the green. The first film we screened was To Kill a Mockingbird. Some said it was too on the nose. I said it was perfect. That night, under strings of warm lights, Lila leaned against me as the credits rolled. You think Mom's proud? She asked. I smiled. She never stopped being proud. On the first anniversary of the fire, we held a small ceremony in the garden. No speeches, no cameras, just a gathering of those who'd survived it with me. Mara, Mrs. Keene, Alvarez, a few reporters who'd covered the story ethically. I placed a brass plaque in the soil near the rebuilt arbor. It read, "In memory of the roses that burned and the hands that replanted them." We stood in silence, the wind moving softly through the leaves. Somewhere down the street, a wind chime tinkled the same sound that had once filled those nights of dread. Now it sounded like peace. When the others left, I stayed behind. The sun dipped low and the garden glowed amber. I whispered, "We did it, Elena. She's gone. The fear's gone." And for the first time in years, I felt something that wasn't anger or grief. I felt stillness. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a law conference in D.C. about judicial resilience. I almost declined speeches, never were my thing, but Lila insisted. "Tell them about the roses," she said. So I did. I told a room full of judges, lawyers, and journalists that justice doesn't always wear robes. Sometimes it wears work gloves, sometimes a neighbor's courage. I told them the truth. That law without humanity is paperwork, and paperwork without courage is useless. When I finished, the hall was silent. Then they stood and clapped slow at first, then louder until it felt like a heartbeat echoing against marble walls. Afterward, a young attorney approached me. "Judge North," she said, "I watched your case when I was in law school. It made me want to join the DOJ." I smiled. Then it was worth it. But not every ending comes with applause. Some just arrive quietly. Vivian Crane's final appeal was denied. She'll serve out the full 15 years in Danbury. The last report said she spends her days folding sheets in the laundry, trying to organize fellow inmates into a cleaning committee. Some habits die hard. Derek keeps his head down, working construction upstate. Pays restitution each month without complaint. Once he sent a letter through his attorney. "I'm sorry for the fire. I'll never forgive myself, but I'm trying to build instead of burn." I didn't write back, but I didn't tear it up either. Maybe that's its own kind of forgiveness. Caldwell lost his badge and moved 2 towns over. Word is he tends bar now fitting, considering how often he turned a blind eye. And as for me, I stayed on the bench another year. Then, one morning, I realized my hands didn't shake anymore when I held a gavel, but they did when I tried to write new rulings. It wasn't fear. It was knowing when a story's chapter is done. So I retired. Now I spend my mornings in the garden, coffee steaming in one hand, pruning shears in the other. Lila's off at college studying environmental law. The irony isn't lost on either of us. She calls every Sunday, starts every call the same way. "Hey, Dad, how's the neighborhood?" And I tell her the truth. Peaceful, still standing, still free. Sometimes people drive by just to see the house that survived the HOA. They take photos of the roses, ask questions, leave inspired. A few even drop letters in our mailbox thanking us for fighting back. I keep those letters in a box under the stairs. Not as trophies, as reminders. Because survival is only noble if you use it to pull someone else out of the fire. Last week, the state governor visited Cedar Hollow Ridge. She stood on our cul-de-sac, looking at the street where fear once ruled, and said, "This place rebuilt itself from ashes. That's not politics, that's people." She handed me a framed certificate recognizing our case as a landmark in housing justice. I accepted it, but what mattered most wasn't the document. It was the fact that while she spoke, I could hear kids laughing by the park again. Lila's Justice Fund booth had raised another $18,000 that weekend. She texted me a photo. "Dad, we're helping 2 families in Kansas and 1 in Florida." I typed back, "Keep going. That's how the fire stays out. Tonight, the house feels alive. The hum of the fridge, the faint ticking of the clock, the whisper of wind through the window, small things that once meant nothing now feel like miracles." There's a framed quote above the fireplace, engraved into the mantel. "Steel survives fire." It's become our family motto. Not because it sounds strong, but because it's true. Fire didn't destroy us. It purified us. It stripped away everything fake until only truth remained. When I step outside, the night is bright, not from flames, but from porch lights and laughter. Cedar Hollow Ridge no longer fears paperwork or clipboards. Now, the only rules that matter are written in kindness.